Prosecutors have filed new motions against Congressman Duncan Hunter, alleging he used campaign funds to pursue extramarital affairs.
Tonight, Hunter is firing back, saying he is the subject of a political smear campaign. News 8's Richard Allen is live downtown with reaction from Hunter's constituents. Richard?
And Carlo and Marcella, these latest allegations spell out in great detail what was hinted at in earlier court filings, now alleging that Congressman Hunter used thousands in campaign funds to bankroll a series of affairs with D.C. insiders. Now, this comes on top of allegations he also used campaign cash for family vacations and personal luxuries. And while many of his constituents in the East County have in the past steadfastly stood by him, these latest revelations may change that.
I think Duncan Hunter is in trouble.
Among those who have not supported Congressman Duncan Hunter in the past,
He's gone a long way to really make himself look bad.
to those who have continuously backed him.
I think he's got a few problems to iron out.
These latest legal allegations are giving some East County residents pause.
I think there's an element of truth there, and so it makes me concerned.
This latest federal court filing claims the Republican representative used campaign funds to help pay for 5 extramarital affairs, including with lobbyists and an employee in his congressional office. Those expenses, according to the motion, include hundreds of dollars on Uber rides to and from his alleged mistress's homes, a ski vacation with one of the lobbyists to Reno, where he claimed he was attending a conference, spending in excess of $1,000 covered by his campaign coffers. And in another instance, a double-date road trip to Virginia Beach with that same woman, spending more than $900 at a hotel and $257 on mileage reimbursement, even though the lobbyist, according to prosecutors, drove the group in her own car.
I think it's going to really support.
This Santee couple has supported Hunter in the past, voting for him as recently as last year. As for the next election, though,
I have to think about it, to tell you the truth.
I'd like to hear more from him. I mean, I've heard very little.
Speaking to CBS News in Washington earlier Tuesday, Hunter called the prosecutors in his case, quote, criminally political.
This is political and it's a smear campaign.
Now, Congressman Hunter has pleaded not guilty. His trial is set for September 10th. He had previously suggested it was his wife, as his campaign manager, who had mismanaged the funds. However, Margaret Hunter pleaded guilty to the charges she faces earlier this month, agreeing to tell everything to prosecutors. Her sentencing is set for September 16th. Carlo and Marcella?
Thank you, Richard.